11 o'clock on your Monday morning. Welcome in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyrad, Wes Mitchell, Chris Clark back again in studio together after like 2.5 weeks. I can say Happy New Year because we're seeing each other for the first time. Wes just detailed to Jack that he's getting to the end of his line of how long you can say that. I give it 7 days. I say the full
7.
week. If you've not seen somebody after that, it's just assumed we've all said it to somebody at that point. But Happy New Year, guys.
Yeah, Happy New Year, Merry Christmas. Hope everybody had a great holiday. Tyler, hope you had a great holiday. I think it was, so this was well before we had the show. I was doing a hit with Jay, and I still remember this, and I swear it was like January 15th. And he's like, Happy New Year, Wes. And I just was like, no, dude, you can't do that.
Yeah, that's too far.
Is that a Seinfeld episode, or it just should be?
I feel like it probably is. If not, it definitely has all the qualities of being a Seinfeld
Or a
episode.
Herb where Larry David overanalyzes.
I feel like that is one. If it should be if it's not. But also, elephant in the room, I got to ask, Tyler, it's the first day back. Where's your voice? You haven't had to talk for 2 weeks.
I haven't, and I spent last week, the first actual week off I've had in like 6 months, being sick, so the voice ain't back yet.
Oh, man.
You know what it's actually from?
Screaming for the Falcons yesterday?
Nope.
Oh.
The Georgia game is where it originated. And then the Falcons game.
He was one of the Panthers to get in so bad.
He was screaming probably for the Falcons to lose.
Yeah, I kind of was.
Which they
I'm
won,
not
and
gonna lie.
still
And they almost did.
Yeah.
No, I contrary to opinion, I've not been smoking 4 packs a day.
That's good.
See, I go home on the 22nd or whatever. My mom's sick. By the time I leave, my dad's sick. And when I wake up the first morning back in my own bed, I'm sick. So been dealing with that for the past week.
That was rude of them to...
I want to shout out Ed Bird, who dropped this pile of cough drops in my lap this morning. That's been helping me through. I just took some more Mucinex, so only 4 more hours to go, guys.
Okay. And we're going to help you carry this hour. So
you guys just going to talk for the next hour, and I'm just going to add mm-hms and yes.
This is your flu game.
Well, what do you want to talk about, Tyler? There literally is like...
There is an infinite amount of things to talk about. And you guys have been talking about it on GC Live and all that kind of stuff over the past couple of weeks, but it's been a busy 2.5 weeks for Gamecock football. We thought, as we went into our holiday break, that the 3 hires of Stan Drayton, Randy Clements, and obviously Kendall Briles, we were kind of done with coaching changes. And then, things started happening from an LSU standpoint, and boom, Sterling Lucas is suddenly gone.
Sterling Lucas had other ideas. And, Beamer really, I thought, detailed this in detail in his press conference when he introduced Deion Barnes. But, it kind of happened quickly, like almost literally overnight. So it was on like a Thursday night. Sterling Lucas notifies Shane Beamer and Clayton White, like, hey, I got an offer from LSU. And then by Friday morning, he basically says, hey, I'm going to LSU. And then by Saturday morning, Clayton White had already been in touch with Deion Barnes, and it really just moved very, very quickly from there. And, a hire that I think it's kind of funny with Gamecock Nation. You never quite know which way the overall, I guess, the hive mind, to steal the Stranger Things way of saying it. You never know how they're going to feel about something, but everybody, almost, I would say 100%, was like, oh, Deion Barnes, yeah, that's a nice hire. It's a heck of a hire. Young guy, actually has developed quite a resume to be as young as he is, and will have an opportunity to come in and at South Carolina just focus on that edge room. And he obviously, guys, gets one Dylan Stewart back, which was going to be huge for whoever was running that room, Chris.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, too. The last 2 edge coaches for South Carolina have been guys, both young coaches, both guys that South Carolina recruited out of high school, didn't get, and then got back as a coach. Sterling Lucas, Wes, you remember, Shane Beamer recruited Sterling out of high school. He was one of those late bloomers back in the Shrine Bowl days, and from Orangeburg Wilkinson, ended up going to NC State, spent time there, knew Clayton White from there, and came here and did a really good job, as a recruiter, as a developer, someone who had never been in the college game running his own room, had never run his own room in general, and I think was one of those hires that Shane Beamer made that certainly you got to say worked out, was in a situation where, I saw this go around because it always does. Anytime there's a coaching change, USC's being cheap. Not the case here. It, like you said, Wes, happened very quickly, and it looked like something that Sterling Lucas, just for his career, whether or not you agree with it, I mean, you might say, well, he should have just stayed here. That's fine. He felt like that was the best move for his career. Went ahead and did it. From there, once you know he's leaving, okay, this is obviously a very important position. It's an important hire. You need to get it done quickly because the transfer portal is looming, et cetera. And they're able to get Deion Barnes, another guy that G.A. Mangus recruited back in the day out of the Philadelphia area and has spent his entire career at Penn State, both as a player, spent some time in the NFL, went back there as a GA, worked himself back up to running his own room there, and has built in a short period of time a nice little resume, developing Abdul Carter, Chop Robinson. He's got another draft pick or two in there. And so it was important as an important hire for Shane Beamer to make quickly. And I think a hire that when you look at the resume on the surface, another, young coach who I think is going to be hungry to prove himself kind of outside that Penn State bubble now.
Yeah, and obviously this year didn't go the way anybody at Penn State wanted it to, which is why James Franklin was obviously let go mid-season, ended up 6-6. They did end up beating Clemson in the Pinstripe Bowl over the holidays as well, so they did end the season on a positive note there where he got the opportunity to watch a lot of South Carolina tape leading up to that game to get a little bit more of a feel of this room. But in the prior two seasons, 5th and 1st in 2024 and 23, respectively, in overall sacks in the country, as him of the leader of that room had been the GA the prior couple years, was there at the very tail end of Micah Parsons' time at Penn State as well. So he's overseeing a lot of really good talent. Again, coming in here, you got Dylan Stewart coming back. They're going to be very active in the portal and trying to build up that edge room a little bit more as well. But again, to lose Sterling Lucas, who I think goes without question as being one of the best assistants that Shane Beamer has had in his time here at South Carolina so far, feel like he did a pretty good job of replacing that pretty quickly with a guy like Deion Barnes.
Yeah, and you didn't want that to linger because of I mean let's just say it, when it first happened, the fear I think for a lot of fans, and frankly, I don't know if fear is the word, but the concern or the hey, we better get on this even within the building is, hey, is Dylan Stewart going to follow Sterling Lucas there? And that's just the college football world we live in right now. And we were always told, because people have been trying to transfer Dylan out on social media pretty much since the moment he has a big game 1 at South Carolina, and you literally can go back and look on social media and people are like, man, he's going to look great at Ohio State next year. And so Dylan, to his credit, now he's been well compensated, let's be honest, but he could be well compensated anywhere.
Sure.
Anybody was going to pay him top dollar. And so Dylan, to his credit, I don't really get the sense it's ever just been like trying to leave at all. Like, of course, he's going to kind of consider his options, but, he has remained loyal to South Carolina. But we were always told even then, like, hey, man, as long as Sterling Luke is at South Carolina, Dylan ain't going to leave. And then Sterling Lucas takes the LSU job. We know LSU is throwing money, man. Like, they are throwing money like crazy. And so I think it was a genuine concern to track for South Carolina, and was important to get Deion Barnes not just hired, but hired pretty quickly. And from what I understand, they gave Dylan the courtesy of at least keeping him in the loop. Not that he's hiring the coach, but more so like, hey, this is where our mind's at. What do you think? And, I would say not a coincidence that when he, being Deion Barnes, gets hired, Dylan makes his announcement within, 15 minutes? I mean, it was almost back-to-back. So that was not a coincidence at all. And, that leaves that edge room in a pretty good spot. I think they do obviously maybe need to add from the portal a bit, but it's not a spot you just are going to have to remake. Like, they have some depth in the room as well. I think the big question is who now is the favorite to be the starter opposite of Dylan? Is that more along the lines of one of these guys who's been on campus a couple of years, stepping up and moving into that role? Is that one of the transfers from last year who got hurt stepping into that role? Or is that a matter of going out and spending some of your resources on a true, like, plug-and-play, like, this guy's going to step right in and be the starter opposite Dylan?
And I think that's one of the reasons that people are – look, they're going to go to the portal either way, I think, for help at some level. Like you said, Wes, like, who is that? What type of player is it? Does it end up being a plug-and-play, like you said? Does it end up being more of a developmental guy? Is it something in between? We'll see. I certainly think they're going to devote some resources financially to doing that. But one of the reasons that we're all looking around going, okay, who is going to be the guy opposite Dylan is just what you said. Like, two of the guys who were going to factor in last season in a big way didn't factor in at all because they got hurt before game one and they didn't play at all. George Wilson, someone that they seem to like in terms of, hey, he's going to be able to really help us out in the pass rush game. Didn't see him at all. Jaylen Brown, promising young player who I think, guys, probably at a minimum could have given you, 15, 20 snaps, maybe more. Maybe he ends up being a really, really good player there. Maybe he ends up being kind of a third guy with BT and with Dylan Stewart. But we didn't get to see any of them. So I do think you kind of keep that in the back of your mind that as long as those guys are healthy, they're going to factor in a big way. And maybe that takes a little bit of pressure off you in the portal as long as you still feel good about them, which I think they do, and as long as they're healthy. But now you're in a spot where you do have a little bit of depth on paper there. You have one of the most dynamic guys in the country from a physical standpoint in Dylan Stewart. And so Deion Barnes is not walking in here, completely starting from scratch in that room.
And we don't have any confirmed visits from any edge guys as of yet so
not
far,
quite
right?
yet.
So
correct, yeah. A lot of the attention, or at least a lot of the information that has come out so far has been based around offensive line, with some tight end, running back, wide receiver kind of sprinkled in. But, I know people are sitting there going like, all right, when are they going to start adding some offensive linemen to the commit list? I would say you got to remain patient. It feels like it's a large net of guys that they're involved with, but we don't quite know exactly who, there's always this kind of initial mutual interest, and then it starts to get to a point, all right, well, you're going to get these 5 guys or whatever on campus. Well, then it goes from there. Which guys does it really just where all sides kind of match up?
Yeah.
And, we're just not quite at that point yet.
Well, we did have one commitment out of the portal so far last night. We'll have into that coming up next as we continue on with the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on your Monday here on The Game. All right, welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Todd West, Chris, along with you here on your Monday on the Game, recapping everything that's happened in the past 2 weeks in Gamecock sports as we've been away for the holidays and the new year. Of course, the transfer portal opened up on January the 2nd, which we've known for the past couple weeks. A lot of guys that were going to be putting their names into the portal. We didn't know when we'd start hearing names coming out of the portal, but Carolina did not wait long to get their first commitment. Last night, it was made official that Jaden Gibson, coming over from Oklahoma at wide receiver, the first official portal commitment for South Carolina in 2026. 6'5" junior, has not played the past 2 seasons because of injury, but does add depth to a wide receiver room that has lost both Dre Jacobs as well as Brian Rowe Jr. in the past couple weeks.
Yeah, and I think, guys, so here's the thing about this pickup. You're going to have different kind of levels with your portal pickups, and sometimes you're going to take a shot on a guy. Sometimes you're going to take a flyer on the guy. Yes, there have been injuries here, and I think in terms of your expectations for him, that does maybe limit your expectations a little bit. However, if you go back and look at what he did at Oklahoma before he got hurt, there's some clips floating around out there on Twitter, on social media right now. And, this guy was an elite wide receiver in terms of his high school ability and what he was starting to show a bit in college. And so the question then becomes like, all right, is this someone that you're committing a bunch of your resources to, or is this more of like a resourceful pickup where you're going, there's minimal risk here, but there's potentially very high reward if it pays off. So, South Carolina is certainly going to add more guys from the portal. They're certainly going to add guys that have, are higher ranked in the portal rankings and all that. But this is just you're going to take a shot on a guy who you're very familiar with and that you believe has quite a bit of upside.
Yeah, it's really gotten very, very difficult to be resourceful in the transfer portal and in recruiting in general because, first of all, and I've continued to see this going around, I thought there was a cap. There's no cap, okay? If anybody talks about a cap, they're only talking about revenue sharing. Every single Power 4 school is going above the cap, all of them. How they're doing it, there's different, we could have an entire show on that, and we're not going to do it because some of it's kind of boring, to be honest with you. But the point is there is a limited amount of resources financially, and when you're in the portal, you're paying. There may be a couple outliers there, but generally you're having to commit some financial resources either from revenue share, above the cap, whatever it may be, to get guys in. And so when you're doing that, you got to be very careful, because this isn't the same as we're taking this high school kid who's developmental, and we'll see what happens. Spend a scholarship on him, no big deal. Pans out, doesn't. You're going to miss on some guys. You're going to miss in the portal too, but you have to make sure, especially with how big some of these numbers have gotten, it takes a lot to lure guys because some other schools out there, whether they're desperate or they just have deep, deep pockets, like the Texas schools, for instance, they can come in and outbid you for a guy who maybe for them is a little bit more of a luxury, or you have like one of the bigger, like more aggressive and bigger spending teams in the portal this cycle is Wisconsin. Why? They stink right now. So they've got to get a lot better, and that's going to mean committing more financial resources in some cases to kids who might be more of a flyer. So what you don't want to do if you're South Carolina is take, do you need some receivers in the room? Sure. But you don't want to overcommit resources to that position when you have, for instance, an entire offensive line to rebuild. Jaden Gibson, from our understanding, not a situation where you're having to overcommit in terms of resources to get him in the room. And like you said, Wes, lower risk from that standpoint, but also potentially you've got a reward because a potential higher reward because if he turns into, the type of player that he can be, that he's shown that he can be in spots in the past, then you got a pretty good deal there. It's a kid with, size, obviously, catch radius, ball skills. Like, he's got some intriguing physical tools.
Well, I think you went into this portal cycle, unlike maybe the past couple of years, knowing you didn't have to go out there and find a wide receiver one, because you, on Christmas Day, got the confirmation that Nick Harbor was going to be back. So, boom, there's your wide receiver one. Can you find compliments around him? Again, you lose Brian Rowe. Maybe surprising, as well as Dre Jacobs, considering what both those guys contributed to the offense this past year. But you had a guy in Jaden Gibson who could potentially be your number two. Again, got the measurables you want, 6'5", somebody that could line up on that upside of the field and take some tension away from Nick Harbor. Or if the attention's on Nick Harbor, that's a guy that can benefit from it. So, like you said, really good upside there. Again, the injury stuff's always something you're going to keep in the back of your mind because of his history with that. If he can stay healthy, he can be somebody that can play a big role in this offense.
Yeah, for sure. And, I believe if the right guy wants to come, I believe they'll take another receiver out of the portal too. We'll see how that kind of shakes out. All this stuff is fluid, guys. So, it can change very, very quickly. But obviously, rebuilding this offensive line has to be priority 1, 2, and 3. And so I don't know if you're talking about necessarily the most flashy transfer portal class in the world, because of that very thing. And here's the thing. Because you got Lenore Sellers back, because you got Nick Harbor back, because you got Dylan Stewart back, like, you're not out there going for a QB1, which would generate excitement, right? Hey, what's the new quarterback going to be? Is Josh Hoover going to follow, Kendall Briles to South Carolina? Which one of these wide receiver ones are we going to try to sign? You're just not in that market because you already got back those spots. And so college football used to be, let me just stack as much talent as possible. You didn't care if you had a QB1. You're still, hey, another guy wants to come, stack him on the depth chart. He'll start next year. And these days, it's just hard to do that. Guys want to play. Guys, if they're in the portal, certainly want to play. They want money and they want playing time. So, you kind of have to be smart about how you allocate those resources. As of right now, you have Shed Surratt coming back, which I think probably one of the most important guys to keep among that group when you look at a true freshman who played pretty well. And Nolan Hay planning to come back, who was able to maintain his red shirt last year because of the injury, and as of right now is planning to come back to South Carolina. So you basically have those two guys that have really played. Tamola Jitahoon right now, a young guy that showed some promise, wasn't really ready yet this past year. And, I guess Jatavius Shivers, who we go back and forth on how we say his name. But, he's played some for you as of right now. Appears he's planning to be back, but really you're restarting, you're rebuilding a lot of those spots. I think Shed, you can definitively say, will be a starter next year. But even then, I think Hay would probably compete at center, but you're probably looking to add 4 starter quality guys. And if they're not guaranteed starter guys, you kind of have to look at doubling up, can you get 2 guys here and make them compete for a starting job?
Yeah, and I think what you said is important, because a lot of people, I get it. It's just like high school recruiting. You want to see the big names in the portal, and you want to see a volume. First of all, I don't think there's any SEC school that has 10 portal commitments right now. Do others have more than South Carolina? Yeah, absolutely. Let's get through the window, see where all that ends up, and then at that point, for everybody, it'll just be on paper, right? You got to actually see how they perform. Some of the guys that South Carolina's taken through the portal, Spencer Rattler was a big name. Juice Wells was a huge name at his level at James Madison. Kyle Kennard, not a Nagurski winner, but a name that people knew. But they've taken a lot of guys where you go, who is that? And they turned out to be pretty good players. So there'll probably be a mix. But what you said, Wes, is important. A lot of these other schools, one of the reasons that they're going after some of these huge, one of the highest paid quarterbacks, one of the highest paid edges, is because they lost those guys also, whether it's to the NFL, whether it's transfer. Look at Auburn. They lost Cam Coleman. They're looking for a quarterback. They lost a bunch of other players, right? And so they're having to go out and spend according to the market, to replace those players. South Carolina will certainly spend too, and they are going to have to, offensive line, that's the biggest chief concern. That's the number one job. They're going to have to add some impact players at other spots. But some of the star power and some of the, guys that are maybe the most highly coveted are going to schools that, A, have super deep pockets, or B, those schools have to have a guy at those spots, where South Carolina's kind of filled out by retaining some of those guys already.
We'll continue to examine the dynamic of rebuilding the offensive line via the portal coming up next. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on The Game. Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler West, Chris along with you here on your Monday on the game, talking all things transfer portal as the window officially opened on January the 2nd. Jaden Gibson, the first one that South Carolina was able to pluck, wide receiver from Oklahoma so far. But we know they're going to be very, very busy when it comes to getting transfer portal offensive linemen. Of the 15 guys that entered their name into the portal from South Carolina's team this past year, 7 of them are offensive linemen. And as you mentioned a moment ago there, Wes, Shed Surratt, Nolan Hay, the only ones with starting experience, returning to this team coming up next year. So it's going to be a very active time for building the offensive line in the portal. And that's a dangerous, dangerous thing. We've seen portal building on the offensive line go very badly for teams like Colorado a couple years ago, because that is a unit that does focus a lot on continuity, gelling, working together as one, and bringing in 5 guys from 5 different places sometimes doesn't always work out. So that is kind of the fine line you're walking that Coach Clem's going to have to do a really good job of when it comes to evaluating and bringing in talent to make sure these guys can work as one when the fall rolls around.
Yeah, I mean, you got to hope you can be Vandy. I guess, would Oklahoma fit the category from this past year to an extent?
Yeah.
I mean, you got to, like, there have been some places where it's worked out to an extent. There's been some places where it absolutely has not. And, you know, I think you've, in my opinion, a perfect world, maybe you would have liked to have kept, like, a guy or two in addition to Shed and Nolan, to where you're not having to fill quite so many spots. You know, however, when you have a clean slate, you've got a new coach, you've got a new offense. You know, I don't know how much necessarily continuity there was going to be anyway when you're talking about a completely new approach on the offensive line. So if you're, you know, if you're a new coach coming in, whether you're running the offense or you're running the offensive line, you can kind of say, all right, I'm going to go get my type of guys. There's not going to be much of, well, this guy's a decent player, but he doesn't fit our scheme. This guy was more of a fit for what they were doing before, not what we're doing. You got a bunch of holes to fill, which can be both good and bad. So, you know, I'm telling people, hey, let's see what this group looks like once they've signed. Let's see what this group, obviously what's going to matter is what they look like on the field coming up next fall, or this fall, I guess, at this point. So, yeah, but it ain't going to be easy, to be honest.
Well, you know, it is dangerous as a word, Tyler. I think, you know, risky is a word. You know, one thing that we know is that they needed to shake up things, you know, and so what does that mean and how do you get there? You know, and it's not, of course, it wasn't just the personnel. You know, was that part of it? Yeah. But it's scheme, it's development / coaching, it's personnel. Like, you could point to each of those things. And if you need more evidence, Shane Beamer made a coaching change. Shane Beamer made an OC / scheme change. And now you're seeing, you know, the results of that in terms of what they think on the personnel. And I think it's turned out probably even a little bit differently than South Carolina imagined. I mean, they obviously knew, you know, as far back as during the season, that there's going to be some guys that would depart this roster at the end of the year, because you're going to sit down with some guys at the end of the year and say, hey, guys, you know, we probably need to move on here. Did we foresee, you know, Tro Ball leaving or Josiah Thompson? Probably not originally, but you also know it's 2025, now it's 2026. You know that in this era, there's a lot of different moving parts with NIL and the finances and all these different things. So you kind of have to prepare for that. I'm with you, Wes. I mean, I think ideally you wouldn't be undertaking this massive of a change, and that does make it more challenging. Offensive line is a hard position to evaluate in high school. It's hard to evaluate in the transfer market. It's a pretty costly position, particularly when you look at offensive tackle. And you're also balancing here, you know, you're not looking for, hey, let's plug in one starter here and we're good. Or let's add this depth piece who may not be as big of an investment. You're looking for all those things. You know, you came into this cycle knowing that you needed probably, 5, 6 offensive linemen. That number's probably grown now because you've had, 7 depart. You know, and even when you had those 7, Shane Beamer talked during the season about how they were a little short on bodies. So they're bringing in 3 from the high school class, but those are high schoolers. They're if one of them is ready to play a role this year, maybe Darius Gray, that's a bonus almost. So you're looking at needing to get a mix of starters and depth guys, and frankly, that can be challenging.
And I think the Josiah Thompson element of this is so interesting because, again, he's the most polarizing guy that you had, given his status coming out of high school, and took a step back this year. There's no denying that. And that's the most glaring example when you look at what was going wrong with Lonnie Teasley. He's a guy like that not living up to his potential. And I think there was intrigue and excitement of, okay, well, let's see what Randy Clements can do with him if he can get him back to being the guy that we think he's capable of being. And his reasons for going the portal obviously could be financial. Maybe some other school said, hey, we'll bring you in, we'll get you where we need to be, and we'll pay you X amount of money. Or maybe South Carolina in those exit interviews did say, hey, we don't see what we want out of you. Maybe it's best you go somewhere else. We don't know the details of those kind of things, but I think we were all intrigued to see what he could have been under an offensive line coach that now we're obviously not going to know.
Yeah, I mean, he's one of the guys that, and he did not perform great last year, but I think has talent. He was a high 4-star or a 5-star, depending on where you look, out of high school, and certainly had upside, and it just has not worked out to this point. I think there are a variety of reasons why it didn't work out in terms of him leaving. That I don't want to get into a lot of them, but the fact of the matter is, you were kind of. I don't know if you're South Carolina, if you could have penciled him in to a starting spot next year, but you could have penciled him into, all right, this is somebody who's going to, again, compete for a starting spot, and that we believe there's still upside to be had there if we can develop him. And, there are a couple, for me, Josiah and Tro would have been the two guys I would have probably been most intrigued to keep. There are some other guys that left that, either just there was little effort or no effort from South Carolina to keep, on purpose, basically. There were other guys that you're kind of going, we want to keep you, but only at a certain price point as well. Like, this is not just digital anymore, ones and zeros, scholarship or no scholarship. It's, all right, we like you. You've done okay. We want to keep you, but only if it's at this financial rate. And now the new thing is just with rev share. If you're just kind of done with a guy for schools, hey, we're just not interested in giving you much, if any, money anymore.
Yeah, and so then if you make that decision, the challenge is, and to be clear, I'm making these numbers up. Let's say you've got, an offensive lineman that wants, I'm making the number up, $500,000, which is not, that's probably on the lower end for some, especially like a tackle. I mean, they're $1 million players in that category. And you go, you know what? We just, internally, that's not our value. We think we can go get better. Well, then you got to go out and get better, If that's your starter, if that's kind of what you value a starter at, you got to go get it. And it's still recruiting. Like, if you've got an offensive lineman who can command $500K, $1 million out of the portal, they're probably commanding that from more than one school. There's going to be other offers, and so you actually have to recruit those players, bring them in. You have to hope your evals work out. You have to, structure the finances within your overall budget. But, when you look at South Carolina and how they're trying to attack things, we've seen more offensive guys in terms of just visits, and the defensive guys, that'll come, But a huge priority is situating the offensive line, and that's why you've heard, a lot of the names that you're hearing them involved with are on the O-line, because they need such a high volume of players from the portal. They need depth, they need competition, but they also need starters. And this is graduated from, hey, they need to go out and get a few guys, they need to upgrade, they need to provide some more competition. You got to go find a starting center, to now you're looking at probably multiple starters out of the portal, and that'll be expensive.
Yeah, give me a busy time trying to get guys out of the portal and monitor that. as the days and weeks go by. But they were able to retain the biggest 3 names from the roster this past year. We're getting to that coming up next to wrap up the hour. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler West, Chris, along with you on your Monday here on The Game. All right, welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler West, Chris, wrapping up the hour here on your Monday on The Game. And again, trying to recap everything that's happened in the past couple weeks for Gamecock football. We'll get into more of this coming up tomorrow and obviously continue to detail any new portal commitments that we get as that goes along. But one of the biggest questions going into this past offseason was, okay, Dylan Stewart, Lenore Sellers, and Nick Harbor. Can you retain any, if all 3 of those guys? And I think most people would have said after the Clemson game, the opportunity to retain all three. Probably would have been on the low end, but low and hold, they certainly were able to do that. Even after the scare of losing Sterling Lucas, Dylan Stewart quickly recommits to South Carolina. Nick Harbor does it on Christmas. We've been tracking the Lenore Sellers win for a couple days, and once we went into our break, he officially committed back to South Carolina. So you got your three kind of cornerstone guys returning, and obviously you need to build around them, get the team better around them to make next year better. But obviously, job well done on getting both those guys and getting those boxes checked for next year returning.
Yeah, and I think obviously for those guys, there's changes around them, and you're going to have a different offense coordinator, different quarterbacks coach, a different scheme for Lenoris, and you're hoping for him and for the team's sake and for his sake that he's able to take that step forward that we all anticipated happening this past season. For Dylan Stewart, I think it's a matter of continuing to add guys around him while also, I think Dylan's a top 10 pick regardless, I'm pretty sure. So it's going to be about continuing to do what he's doing while also taking a step forward. The most intriguing person, I would say, out of that trio is still – what does the upside look like for Nick Harbor? Because we saw the progress this year. And what does another full offseason of progress look like for a guy like Nick Harbor? He could have come out, gone to the draft, and gotten selected by somebody somewhere just based on, 6'5" and runs a 10-1 and et cetera, et cetera. Well, he wants to continue to become a complete wide receiver. We saw what actually getting to go through spring practice last offseason did for him. Took a big step. Still was not quite that dominant number one wide receiver yet. But we've seen the kid will work. He's worked tirelessly to improve his hands, to improve his ability to track the football, to improve his route running. We finally got to see a short completion turn it into an 80-yard gain at Texas A&M. So what does the final encore look like for a guy like Nick Harbor? I think it's going to be one of the more intriguing questions for South Carolina going into next year.
Well, I think to the general point of retention, too, it has been, take away everything else. Obviously, we saw the season and how it went. We saw, the 2023 season and how it went. Going 5-7 this past year, 4-8. In between there, a really good season. And, one of the reasons that South Carolina was able to turn things around from, I don't know if y'all remember, after the 2023 season, the vibes were not great. And the retention of key players ended up being critical. And they obviously went and had a really good portal year, too. But under Shane Beamer, this team has done a good job. This program's done a good job, he and his staff, of retaining key talent. And if you're going to turn that around, if you're going to turn things around in 2026, that was going to be an important part. Now, if Sellers and Stewart, Harbor, one or all of them and some other guys had walked, you do have an opportunity to go into the portal nowadays and replace those guys, but at a cost and, not with guys that and what that they're capable of. So they prioritize getting those guys and others. We've seen, the linebacking core, for instance. Justin Okoronkwo absolutely would have been a guy, and I'm not guessing on this, that if he had gone in the portal, would have been a huge priority for some big-name schools. J.R. Johnson, he's back. Sean Murphy, so your top three linebackers are back. That's significant. So it's not just those big three, that everybody was wondering about. It's some other guys that they've been able to keep and will be able to keep, even Shed Surratt, like you mentioned, Wes, a promising young player who played a role for you last year. If you're going to get better, even though this team did not have the season that anybody wanted, there's still some really good players that other schools wanted off of this roster. So to keep those, I think, is significant. Now you got to go in, make some other changes, which they've done. We'll have to see how those work out. And then you got to go supplement through the portal. You're going to be finding a mix of starters and depth guys to try to get better.
Well, and it starts your expectations of 2026 at a certain level, saying, especially just with having Sellers coming back, as you mentioned, not having to go in the portal and find wide receiver one or look at Cutter Woods, Landon Duckworth, and say, okay, which one of you guys is going to start for the first time in your college career right out of the gate here? So you've got a really good jump on things with Sellers coming back, and obviously need a lot of things to be better next year to keep this train rolling. But so far, so good for what we've seen so far this offseason.
Yeah, most people, I think, are pretty excited about the offseason and bringing in an OC. We talked about that, who has, just a track record and has done it at the college level and has experience calling plays at this level and having success with it. So I think all those things are reason to be excited about. We'll see what this roster looks like and what the other guys who are going to be available to kind of work with are all about.
Anything else, Chris?
I didn't have a lot to add to that.
Okay.
I think Les said it quite well.
Should I offer congratulations for y'all's Carolina Panthers making the playoffs? Thanks to my Falcons winning yesterday against the Saints.
Yes, thank you.
I mean, it counts.
It
even
does.
if it was...
You can always count on the Atlanta Falcons.
To do something very bizarre.
Did y'all see where somebody had basically brought up this possibility of it going like this like weeks ago?
Oh, man. And I'm not surprised.
They were like, statistically, this is like a 0% chance of happening.
And of course.
But it is like, but it was so minute. They were like, this is kind of interesting, but it'll probably never happen.
It's gonna happen to my team.
Yes.
So we'll see what happens. Keep pounding in the playoffs. That'll do it for the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Coming up next, halftime show. Myself, Scott Hamilton, on your Monday on the Game.